Good morning, and however this week has treated you, take a slow breath before we begin, because the road to this examination is long, and the students who make it are the ones who protect their calm as carefully as they protect their preparation. This is the Sociology Desk, issue number 90. Today we are working with two live developments, one from India's latest employment data and one from a Supreme Court ruling on family law. And by the end of this session, you will know exactly which thinker to name, which concept to anchor, and how to turn both into marks in your sociology optional. Let's start with the Periodic Labor Force Survey for 2026. It showed a sharp jump in rural women joining the workforce, most of it in agriculture. If you only describe that statistic in an answer, you get almost nothing. What the examiner wants is for you to read that number as evidence of a deeper shift in agrarian class structure, which sits squarely in paper 2 under social classes in India. Here is the core idea. As landholding gets smaller across generations, and as men leave villages for non-farm work or migrate to cities, the household still needs cash income. So women who were earlier doing unpaid domestic and farm work get pulled into wage labor. This is not liberation. It is what we call semi-proletarianization, a household sliding from being independent cultivators toward being dependent on wages. That is the first move you make in your answer, from statistic to structure. Two more moves complete the picture. Karl Marx gave us the idea of a reserve army of labor, a pool of workers who can be pulled in and pushed out of employment as needed, and whose very availability keeps wages low for everyone. Female agricultural laborers, hired only in season, function exactly like this. And who decides which households supply this labor? M.N. Srinivasa's idea of the dominant caste answers that. It is the landowning castes of a village who control tenancy and hiring. So caste hierarchy gets layered directly onto class relations. And Dalit and other backward class women end up in the worst paid work. The thinker to anchor this entire answer on is A.R. Desai. In his book, Social Background of Indian Nationalism, Desai argued that Indian agriculture was never a frozen traditional order. It was continuously reshaped first by colonial capitalism and later by capitalist penetration after independence. And this process progressively splits the peasantry into rich farmers, middle peasants, poor peasants, and landless laborers. That single formulation, capitalist penetration causing differentiation of the peasantry, is exactly the sentence an examiner wants to see attributed correctly. Now let me put on the examiner's hat for a moment. An average script, the kind that gets around 14 out of 20, will describe the survey finding accurately, mention that this concerns rural women, and perhaps gesture vaguely at empowerment or distress. A script that gets 18 or 19 out of 20 does something structurally different. It opens with a claim about agrarian class structure, not a definition. It names Desai's mechanism of differentiation of the peasantry in the very first move. Brings in Marx's reserve army of labor to explain the wage effect, and brings in Srinivasa's dominant caste to explain who controls the hiring. Then, and this is what most students skip, it adds a counter perspective, the modernization view that treats this as opportunity, and explains why that view understates the distress involved. It closes by stating plainly whether this change transforms or reproduces the existing hierarchy. Remember the rule that separates the two scripts? The event is your evidence, used in one or two sentences, and the theory is your destination. Here is a probable question built exactly on this logic. In light of the sharp rise in rural female labor force participation reported in the 2026 Periodic Labor Force Survey, critically examine the changing agrarian class structure in India. Practice writing this in 250 words using the sequence we just built. Our second event is a Supreme Court ruling extending parenting entitlements to adoptive parents and pushing for gender-neutral paternity leave. This falls under Paper 2, Systems of Kinship in India, specifically Family and Marriage in India. The theoretical shift here is significant. Thinkers have long debated whether family should be understood as a fixed structure you are born into or as a set of practices you actively perform. The court's ruling leans firmly toward the second view, since it grounds parenting entitlement in the act of caregiving rather than in the biological fact of birth. When the ruling also pushes for paternity leave, it breaks the old assumption that care work is naturally a woman's job, treating fathers as equally legitimate practitioners of family life. Two more names complete this answer. Iravati Karve showed decades ago that kinship systems in northern and southern India rest on very different principles of descent and marriage alliance, which means a single, one-size-fits-all template of family was always going to struggle in a country this diverse. And the doctrinal engine behind the ruling is B.R. Ambedkar's idea of constitutional morality. His argument that a written constitution alone cannot dislodge entrenched social custom. So courts and institutions must actively cultivate a morality that corrects arrangements built on old patriarchal assumptions. The primary thinker to anchor this answer on is David Morgan. In his book, Family Connections, Morgan argued that family is better approached as a set of practices, as something people actively do through routines of care, rather than as a fixed institutional form. Quote that formulation in your own words, attribute it correctly to Morgan, and you have your opening theoretical move. Here is the examiner's view again. A 14-mark script will summarize the judgment competently, tell you what was struck down and why, perhaps mention that it helps working mothers and fathers. An 18 or 19-mark script does something else entirely. It opens by naming the conceptual shift, family moving from fixed status to recognized practice, not by narrating the case facts. It attaches a specific thinker to each dimension. Morgan for the caregiving practice, Karve for regional plurality, Ambedkar for the constitutional mechanism. And crucially, it does not ignore the counterview. A structural functionalist would say the biologically anchored nuclear family remains the stable unit society should organize around. And the topper script weighs this objection honestly before setting it aside. Once again, the event gives you one or two lines of evidence. The theory is where all your marks live. Try this question. David Morgan argues that family is best understood not as a fixed structure, but as a set of everyday practices people perform. Critically examine this formulation with reference to recent trends in Indian family law. Let's bring it together. First, the 2026 Labor Survey is not just a statistic. It is evidence of semi-proletarianization within India's agrarian class structure, best explained through Desai, Marx, and Srinivas. Second, the Supreme Court's parenting ruling marks a shift from family as fixed status to family as recognized practice, best explained through Morgan, Karve, and Ambedkar. Third, and this is the rule for every single current affairs question in this optional. You use the event as evidence in 1 or 2 lines, and you spend the rest of your answer building theory. That is the difference between a script that passes and a script that ranks. That brings us to the end of today's session. I know the days feel long and the syllabus feels endless. And some mornings, the only motivation you will have is the one you make yourself. So let today be the day you write just one more answer than you planned to. If you would like the complete answer block for every event we cover, the model answer, the answer skeleton, the quotation arsenal, the flashcards, and the examiner notes, these are prepared daily and sent only to subscribers. And yes, this is a paid subscription, because the depth and the edge it gives your preparation is built for exactly this examination. You can reach us in one of two ways. Leave your email in the comments below or write